Hello and welcome back to this channel. I'm Jacob Payton and today I'm going to be talking about The Aeronauts Windlass by Jim Butcher. This is a pretty big book. It comes in at, I think like 700 pages or close to 630 pages. So not quite 700, but close enough for me. This is, I feel like, a lot bigger than some of his other books, or maybe I just read the Dresden Files a lot faster. Once again, I'm a big fan of the Dresden Files. I did not get into Codex Alara. I think I pronounced that right. There was just so much stuff I just really wasn't into with that series. But I really enjoyed this. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little hesitant to pick it up. And the only reason I did, because this book did come out, I think in like 2016. It's part of a series. 2015 was the first printing. So this book came out in 2015, and there's not a sequel yet. But once again, the only reason I picked this up was because I saw a post that he made, Jim Butcher had made, saying that there was going to be a sequel. There was one in the works, and I think it's either coming out this year or next year. So that made me more willing to pick this up because, once again, this is a big time investment. This is a big book. This is a big time investment to jump into, especially for it to be a series and there not be any sequel in sight or even a mention of one. So the fact that there was one, or at least one that's being worked on, made me a lot less hesitant. And I'm glad I picked it up because, believe it or not, I did really enjoy this book. And it says, since time immemorial, the spires have sheltered humanity, towering for miles over the mist-shrouded surface of the world. Within their halls, aristocratic houses have ruled for generations, developing scientific marvels, fostering trade alliances, and building fleets of airships to keep the peace. Captain Grimm commands the merchant ship Predator. Fiercely loyal to Spire Albion, he has taken their side in the Cold War with Spire Aurora, disrupting the enemy's shipping lines by attacking their cargo vessels. But when Predator is severely damaged in combat, leaving captain and crew grounded, Grimm is offered a proposition from the Spire of Albion to join a team of agents on a vital mission in exchange for fully restoring Predator and its fighting glory. And even as Grimm undertakes this dangerous task, he will learn that the conflict between the Spires is merely a portent of things to come. Humanity's ancient enemy, silent for more than 10,000 years, has begun to stir once more, and death will follow in its wake. So, minor spoiler, we don't really figure out what humanity's ancient enemy is. What we do know about the Spires is that people live in them. People do not live on the ground. This makes things like iron and, paper, because anything made from trees, very expensive. There's actually a scene in here where a building is, I think it's actually on fire or something, and people are hesitant to break down the door because doors are so expensive and they don't want to get fined for it. That being said, I had a really tough time picturing how the spires actually looked, other than the fact that I knew they were cities, I knew there was levels to them. I understood that there's sewers and stuff. There are things that tether them to the ground and connect them to the ground in a way that things from the ground can come up. And we do learn that there are basically large, predaceous creatures, animals, and insects that live on the Earth's surface. But that being said, I really couldn't picture them, and I really wish they had included, or maybe it exists somewhere and I just haven't looked hard enough, some sort of, maybe in the second book, if we can get it, because I think there's a map of some stuff, or no, there's not a map in this, but I just need like an idea of what the spires look like, because yeah, we do get maps of like the landings and stuff like that, but I can't, and maybe it's just me, but I could not picture what a spire looks like to save my life. I kept thinking of kind of like the city of Eberron for those that are familiar with D&D, but that probably isn't how it's being described. Now, this book is kind of steampunky, so if you're into that, you're going to really enjoy this. It's a lot of copper. Even their guns, gun barrels, and all of that all use copper, and they kind of make a point of that, and that's kind of why people tend to fight with swords, because guns are expensive, especially when you have to copper melts, so the guns only have so many uses before you have to switch up. So I did kind of enjoy them pointing that out. I also like that the magic users that are introduced in this book, they aren't overly powerful in, the way that a lot of Harry Dresden, for instance, in the Dresden Files, as each book progresses, he becomes super powerful to the point that, he can literally throw fireballs and stuff out of his hand, and so the enemies have to get more and more powerful as well. Whereas in this book, there are limitations put on them. For instance, the more powerful an Etherealist, I might be pronouncing that wrong, is, the more kind of mad they are, because they kind of do explain this in this book, so that is a minor spoiler. I'm not going to obviously explain which characters and how this plays out, but the more powerful they are with magic, the more holes there are in their brain, so to speak, and the more mad they are. And this madness plays out in essentially almost like a number of OCD-like tics that I thought was kind of interesting. For instance, one of the characters, Folly, she doesn't talk to people directly. She has to be holding a jar full of crystals for her to talk, and she kind of talks in the third person about the person she wants to speak to, but everything is talked to at the crystals, and that is the price of her power, and I found that to be very interesting. There are also sentient cats in this book, and I thought that was going to be a little cheesy, but when I first read it, when I first heard about it, I did a little sleuthing before I picked the book up, and I did think the whole cat thing was going to be somewhat cheesy, and I was wondering how it was going to play out. It was kind of amazing. I actually really enjoyed all the parts in which we followed Raoul the cat in this book, and how the somewhat tribal cat society played out, because they do have tribes and clans and all these things, and there is a pecking order, and even the way that they speak to each other and go about things was very fleshed out in a way that I don't think always happens in fantasy books. I think, there are, at least what I've been reading lately, I picked up a lot of fantasy books where we get a couple paragraphs explaining that culture or that tribe, and then the rest is more of a, let your imagination fill in the gaps. And I think that didn't really happen here, and I appreciated that, because the world building in this book is simply amazing. Everything from the house systems to the way the gauntlets work, to the magic systems, to the cats. It was amazing. I absolutely love this book. I'm excited for a second book to come out. Now, I will say there was some stuff with Captain Grimm that I feel like wasn't gone into enough. But that being said, this is the first book, so I feel like, spoiler alert, the things with his previous marriage, and even some of the stuff with him, because once again, this isn't a minor spoiler, but this is a spoiler. Captain Grimm was kicked out of the Navy for cowardice, which you learn very quickly he's no coward, so that's obviously not true. But some of the reasons for that and him being pushed out weren't as deeply gone into as I feel like they might be in the second book, so I am really looking forward to that. Because Captain Grimm is not a young man. He is not like the other characters where they're in their late teens and early 20s and signing up to be guards and kind of really starting life on their own, so to speak. Captain Grimm is up there in age, and he's kind of lived a life. He was in the Navy, he was married, he runs a whole ship basically on his own. The ship has some secrets to it that I'm not going to spoil, but he goes around and he kind of does a bit of privateering. So I definitely want to dive into his backstory and also more the history of the Spires, because we're given Spire Albion and Spire Aurora, but we're not given a whole lot of backstory and why there's so many tensions between them. And there was times where it was a little jarring, because not so much about the tensions and the way those play out, but just the fact that what's scarce and what isn't. Because on the one hand, everything that's based off of wood is supposed to be scarce, but then everyone has these massive fleets of wooden ships, and monks have libraries and all these things. So it's like, how scarce is it actually? Other than, maybe not scarce is the wrong word, but it's expensive. So that's going to kind of be interesting to play out, because I am very interested in understanding how, if they all live basically up in the air, how are these natural resources acquired, and what does that look like? They do mention that, people are sent to the surface for various reasons, but I definitely, once again, I can't picture a spire, and that's my failing. So I definitely want to see, hopefully, some more world building in the second book that's going to deal with the surface. I mean, obviously, it's Jim Butcher, so I know he's gonna, because, I've been a long-time reader of the Dresden Files, and he might not tie up every loose end in every book, but they do get tied up in a later series. Now, that being said, there has been a pretty large gap between when this book came out to when the sequel might come out. So I am, hoping that we get basically as much depth in the sequel that we got in this book. If you like sword fighting and guns and people that can use magic on flying ships, very spelljammer-esque, then I think you're gonna enjoy this book and this series. If you're looking for like steampunk-esque airships, while there is some steampunk elements in the way that I think they dress and fight with swords and use copper and everything, I don't feel like you're gonna get that feeling if that's what you're looking for, because this is very much its own thing. Essentially think more Dungeons and Dragons Spelljammer. The ships run on magic crystals, basically, and are then kind of propelled by wind, but a lot of the actual ship systems are all running on magic. I don't know why I couldn't say ship right there, but anyway, all the ship systems are running on magic. So it's very much less steampunk and more spelljammer, which, as much as they talk about tabletop games in the Dresden Files, I'm gonna probably safely assume that Jim Butcher plays tabletop games and is probably very familiar with spelljammer. So I did kind of enjoy that, to be honest, because I'm also a fan of spelljammer, and I like the way ships work in spelljammer. While 5e, it's a little broken in the second edition, I think, and then 3.5, it wasn't too bad, but that is a whole nother tangent. So yeah, I enjoyed that aspect, and it also kind of makes sense because all of their society kind of runs on these magic crystals. That's how they get a lot done. And this is one more minor spoiler. We do kind of get the hint that the crystals might be a little more than meets the eye, but it doesn't really dive into, how sentient they are and kind of what that means and what the ramifications of that is. So that is something I'm also very excited to see about in a second book. I very much like this book. I'm excited to see a continuation of this series. If you've read some of his other fantasy series, or I think he only has the one other fantasy series, the Codex Alera, and like me, you didn't like that for, whatever reason, I would say 100% give this book a chance. Or even if maybe you read the Dresden Files and you didn't like the Dresden Files and you want, a different type of story, I would say give this a chance. I know some of the critiques of the Dresden Files. Harry Dresden is more of a pulp-style detective. He gets beat up, he gets knocked out, and then he wins in the end, usually. Not without some great personal loss throughout the story. And I appreciate that because I also like gritty noir style stories as much as I like urban fantasy, and I know that's not for everybody. This is much more of a fantasy, right? There's magic, there's swords, there's crystals that do magic, there's talking cats, and there's head hopping. It doesn't follow one character the way the Harry Dresden books do. So once again, if you like Jim Butcher's writing style, but you didn't like Harry Dresden, I would say go ahead and give this book a try as well. If you're like me, you don't like head hopping and the idea of having to follow multiple characters as a turnoff for you, I will say that go ahead and still give this book a chance, because I enjoyed following each of the characters. All the characters were enjoyable to read about, even the bad guys, because just kind of seeing how far they were willing to go, and the sacrifices they were making essentially was very interesting, and it very much made everyone a very distinct character, which I enjoyed. Once again, I really just need that second book now that I finished this one, because I want to know, when Aurora goes off and basically does the things that they do in this book, I want to know why. I kind of want some more backstory on these tensions and, why they kind of feel the need to attack. I will say that while I was reading about it, obviously Spire Albion, it gave me a feel of, obviously not time period wise, but it kind of gave me the feel of England versus Spain, right? They had a big naval conflict, and it was kind of giving me the same vibes. Obviously, Albion is a pretty easy to draw that. Aurora, not so much, but that's kind of the vibe I was picking up. So I don't know if it's just because like proximity tensions, or if there was like a bigger underlying cause. So yeah, either way, I'm excited for the second book, because there are, as you can tell from this video, a lot of loose threads that I want to see tied up, and also some more like world building I want to read about, because I really did enjoy every minute of diving into this world. It was very fresh, it was very original, and I like airships, and I'm not going to apologize for that, because airships are fun. I like spelljammer, even if I can't find people that want to play spelljammer on a regular basis, because that's a hard concept for even a lot of Dungeons and Dragons players to grasp onto. So yeah, I like this book. I am definitely going to read the sequel. I highly recommend, if you like fantasy, to give this book a chance. You can do what I do and borrow it from the library if your library has it. If you've read this book and you liked it or didn't like it, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.